Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
Survival was the rule of the day.
My jaw was broken. I could feel my molars in the centre of
We
my
weren't out there
mouth.
to take country. We were out there
At the end of the day, everyone
That was our job.
wearing green is a soldier.
We've lost communication.
Getting yourself blown up does some interesting things to you.
A place like the Middle East is constantly
There's
changing.
quite enough pressure
What
when
we
you
do there
deploy
is
and
constantly
everything
changing.
We killed Dave.
And this, I think, was our own minefield. He held me up with a broken whiskey bottle and machete.
Battle for Australia.
Welcome to the second instalment of our special veteran panel episodes. For this episode, Angus Hordern spoke with some previous guests on this podcast about the Vietnam War.
I'm Angus Hordern, and today I'm joined by four of our guests from Season 1. In the studio with us today is Sandy MacGregor. Hi, Sandy.
Hi, Angus. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Also is David Buckwalter
G'day, Angus. Nice to be here again.
and David Leafe,
G'day, Angus. Thanks very much for being here.
and finally our pilot, Ron Aitken.
G'day Angus, good to be here.
Thank you, gentlemen. Many of our listeners will have heard your stories before, and to those who have discovered us more recently, we encourage you all to go back and listen to these great stories from before. So, to start, before we go back through the war, you all had prior military experience in your life. Specifically talking just on cadets right now, how useful was cadet service for you, David?
Well, I think, Angus, it set the scene for me in that I sort of got to know what the army was like. I suppose you get the flavour of it. Even though I was in the brass band, you did everything, all the marching, doing things together. And I know that when I was offered a scholarship while I was at university to go into the forces, the decision wasn't hard to decide I wanted to go into the army, looking for a little bit of more adventure on the ground than what I might have had up until then. And I do remember when I was interviewed for the scholarship at Victoria Barracks, and all these generals and brigadiers were all lined up there. We had such fun talking about the camp days at Singleton and the food, the laced hot chocolate before we went to bed. I think that was always a very much a strong point for me getting the scholarship over others.
So, David, did the hot chocolate do it for you?
I actually can't remember the hot chocolate.
Can't you? You must have missed out on that batch. Yeah.
I was.
Yeah.
I did spend a couple of minutes in the brass band also, but I was a drummer and I couldn't coordinate my sticks too well, so I couldn't do the rolls. So I didn't last there long. But I think the cadets was sort of something that gave you a bit of an understanding of what army life might be like. I don't think it really made a lot of difference if you compared somebody who did do cadets and somebody who didn't do cadets. But, you know, I remember the camping, and I remember we were camping at Singleton and it was really cold, and we were sleeping within literally inches of the fire that we had going because it was so bloody miserable. And I remember things like firing a Vickers machine gun, which was quite a novelty at the time, but did give you some grounding into some idea what it was all going to be like.
Ron, do you remember the cold at Singleton?
I don't recall the cold too much, but I do recall the very uncomfortable palliasses we had to sleep on. We had to stuff straw into these big Hessian bags, and of course, after a couple of camps, you realised that you needed to put a hell of a lot of straw in the bags for it to be comfortable for the length of time of the camp. But I do recall that cadets was it's very useful in the weapons training we received, even the schoolboys, because we got pretty thorough weapons training. I think later cadets probably suffered a bit from that, for that, as I recall. But it was very useful as a cadet in the Air Force to have been trained in drill and weapons, because of course the same thing happened again in the Air Force cadet scheme. So it put me a bit ahead of chaps who hadn't had any cadet training at all. Some of them found a great deal of difficulty in marching and that sort of thing, but for me, having started at such a young age, it was a very natural thing and very easy to do. So it took a bit of the stress off that aspect of of Air Force training.
And Sandy, how were cadets down south in Tasmania at this
I
time?
loved cadets. I loved it. We did a lot of work on weapons training as well, Ron. It was, I can particularly remember the Bren, how we used to have competitions of stripping it and putting it back together again and then doing it blindfolded. I always remember the shooting. We did so much shooting. It was absolutely fantastic. I loved cadets.
Now, Ron and Sandy, besides the cadets, you both had prior military experience before going to Vietnam with other programs that you were in.
Yes, I went to Platoon Military College, and so I had 4 years there. Then I went to Sydney University, did 2 years civil engineering, then School of Military Engineering for 6 months, then New Guinea with 17 Construction Squadron for 12 months. Then I was back in Australia, and then in 1965 we formed a 3-field troop, which was the first troop of engineers that went to Vietnam.
And Ron, how about your prior experience?
Well, when I left school, I started off doing mechanical engineering at uni, and after a year and a half of that, decided that I would join the Air Force. I saw an ad in the paper saying join the Air Force, so I did. The prior cadet experience had no bearing on my joining the Air Force. It was just simply that I wanted to fly. And then, of course, prior to Vietnam, I had other squadron experience in the Air Force. I first of all went to 38 Squadron, and then 36 Squadron, and then 34 Squadron, the VIP Squadron, and then I went to 2 Squadron, or to OCU, 1 OCU, and then up to 2 Squadron.
Well, certainly for you both, having such prior and extensive experience would have helped you a lot, I'm sure.
It certainly did. I mean, I wasn't, having had all that previous squadron experience, it just made me more proficient for what I had to do.
You mean helped us a lot in Vietnam, Angus? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, certainly being accustomed for service when you're deployed.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I needed this experience to be able to command the troop anyway. It was really good experience what I did in the Army for going over to Vietnam. We were very well trained as sappers, no doubt about that.
Of our group here today, you were the first into Vietnam, Sandy, in 1965.
Yeah.
Then David Buckwalter, David Leafe, and then Ron, you were last out in 1970, so the 4 of you really represent the whole extremity of the war. Let's start by talking about the engineers, Sandy, as you were the first tunnel rat, and by the end of your tour, the manner in which engineers were now being deployed with platoons on the front line, and how company policy was changing the guys in the field. So can you give us a bit of an insight into your role in the engineers in Vietnam?
That particular area was quite challenging to do. We started off with all our soldiers at battalion headquarters, and then after battalion headquarters we broke them down into demolition teams of 4 and 6 with company headquarters. Then we broke them down into what we call splinter teams, so that we had splinter teams with each of the platoons within the company and the corporal on company headquarters, who was advising the major, the company commander. And that's where we finished up in Vietnam. That was the particular, it was like an SOP, a standing operating procedure. That's what happened throughout Vietnam, not in every case, but in most cases. And in fact, this is what has gone on today in places like Afghanistan, and today with organisations such as the SAS and with the commandos. In fact, we've got the Special Operations Engineer Regiment training in this same way with SAS and with commandos.
So David Buckwalter, what was your experience with the engineers?
Most company operations or battalion operations, we had a field engineer attached to company headquarters. Wherever we interacted with campsites, Vietnamese campsites, we found either stuff had to be demolished or something had to be checked out for booby traps, or if there were tunnels, check those out. So that was our, let's say, daily interaction. Other than that, my main interaction was in the infamous minefield that was constructed by our engineers, and I was with the company that was first there to secure the engineers. While they laid the mines, we did patrols around them. They were an integral part of a battalion operation.
You could see that the best way of working was to having the sapper basically with the platoon that was doing the clearing, so that when this forward scout came across the booby trap, then the first thing to do was to call for the sapper to be able to clear the booby trap. And this is what happened on many, many occasions. This is what developed, this is the most effective, and this is what's become SOP in Australia now.
Now, Ron, you've got a bit of a different perspective being 10,000 feet up in the air with regard to all these engineers and tunnels and booby traps.
Well, I mean, we weren't at that height all the time. That was just on operations. We were living on the ground a lot of the time. I was at Phan Rang Air Base, and of course that air base had to be defended from intrusion by the NVA and Viet Cong. We had Viet Cong operatives working on the base. In fact, they caught some trying to bring satchel charges onto the base one night and discovered that one of them was one of the base barbers, and the other one was working in one of the messes as an ordinary hand, you know. So there was definite risk and requirement for engineers and sappers and others to be keeping an eye on the booby traps that would be set in the vicinity. Most of the time that was done by the air defence guards. We had some ADGs as part of our squadron, attached to the squadron, and the Americans had some, and of course the whole base was generally secured by the South Korean armed force unit that was living pretty much with us.
Ron, you mentioned something very significant, which was one of the many difficult characteristics of your war, the Vietnam War, which was you are working with local people and you didn't know whether they're friendly or foe.
I'll give you an example of how awkward that could be. At the time I was there, one of our chaplains, a Catholic father, Mcmahon, was doing great work setting up an orphanage in the area of the base and amongst the local community, and doing a great deal of community support work. And he used to encourage many of us to go and give him a hand when we had a bit of spare time. And we never left the base in other than pairs. So we got a lift down to the main gate with myself, and I can't recall the chap I was with at the time, but there were two American F-100 squadron guys from our particular wing also going to the gate, and we used the same vehicle to get there. We went through the gate guard situation. The pair of us went off in our direction to get a lift to the orphanage, and the other pair went a short distance away, and within a fairly short distance from us, a child ran up to one of those pilots and gave him a package, which he opened, and it blew his hand off. So there were certain hazards around the place that we had to be careful of too. Although we were on a well-guarded base, we weren't insulated from it. We used to get rocket attacks. They used to run these rockets from the surrounding countryside. They'd set them up at night time, and they'd set them up with that Anzac type fuse, you know, the water drip fuse, that sort of thing. And when the can emptied, the rocket mechanism was tripped, and these things just landed on the base somewhere randomly. So, and of course they did a great deal of damage where they landed, but sometimes they landed in some open space, sometimes they'd hit a building, sometimes people were injured or killed. So it was a bit of a lottery. And they used to mount mortar attacks from outside the perimeter if they could get close enough, and mortars would lob in. The mortars seldom reached the airfield, which was pretty much centrally placed in the base. The mortars tended to land in the sometimes living quarters and the more peripheral buildings, which is where the less vulnerable, perhaps, that we didn't want aircraft damage and we didn't want munition stores and maintenance areas damaged, so that the living areas were areas that were more susceptible to being hit by these.
Ron's brought up a good point, Angus. He's talking about an American base or a Korean base or something like that. When I was on 173rd Airborne Brigade, which was at Bien Hoa Air Base, there were also Vietnamese allowed on the base. Workers, water washers, all that sort of thing. But we did not allow them into the 3 Field Troop area, nor into any Australian area. Now, I served a month at the Cu Chi Air Base, and the Cu Chi base, 25th Division, they allowed Vietnamese onto the site. Now, when I left the Nui Dat base, when I left there were no Vietnamese there, and you guys could tell us whether they were later.
I could say that I never saw a Vietnamese in the time when I was at Nui Dat, and I can't vouch for Task Force headquarters if there were any workers down there, but I I doubt it very much. We were totally and solely looking after ourselves. We didn't interact with the US forces virtually, or the South Vietnamese, almost nil. We had interpreters, but they were, I suppose, had been...
Cleared.
Cleared, yes. Yes, they'd been security cleared, we hoped.
David Leafe, you'd concur?
Oh yes, definitely. No, there was none on at Nui Dat, but when we went down to Vung Tau, there were on the base in Vung Tau. They were everywhere there.
So what we're seeing, Nui Dat was an Australian base.
Nui Dat was basically the fighting forces base under an old rubber plantation, and they were all tents, basically, except for some nice art buildings. But
in your day.
In my day. Sorry, it's so rough. And then in Vung Tau, of course, was all nice art buildings, and that was basically the support place where all the, I forget what's it called, the...
AATTV.
AATTV, I think that's right, yes.
Training team.
The place basically where the field hospital was and where all the administration took place.
Logistic base.
We're seeing a bit of a theme here, which we also see in the field, that the way the Americans go into the field and wage war is different to the way we do it, and the way they maintain base integrity and security is quite different to the way we do it.
Absolutely.
And as a result, and we can, simplify this with the comparison to your tunnels, our system of doing things, and certainly of cutting down the interaction with the local people and maintaining our own security, reduce casualties. Let's talk about base life. We've already just touched on that. David, I know even in your position, often you would get back to base and you were far from safe. As Ron was saying, you were always within mortar range. The enemy were always probing your defences. Can you share some of those experiences?
As a rule, you did feel fairly safe at Nui Dat. Yes, rockets did come in, but to the extent that no one, they were sort of, as you say, Ron, you said they're off the mark pretty well. And most people say, quick, go to your trenches. There were trenches all around the place that had a cover halfway over the top with bags, and then you could jump down either end into the trenches. Well, no one really got into them because everyone knew they were full of snakes. So you were safer sitting at the top of the trench and obeying orders rather than jumping into the trenches, But as a rule, though, certainly there was a guard all the way around the place. So you did feel pretty safe for all that.
It was home.
It was home. Yeah, it was home. Yes, right. It was when you drove out the gate you were worried.
That fan rang, the rockets would be set through the night so that their primitive fuses would normally have them land on the base around dawn. There was never any point in you getting out of your bed and if you were there and jumping into a trench or whatever we had at the time, because that was it. The rockets had landed, they'd exploded, and that was it for the day. So as long as they didn't hit you, everything was fine for at least another 24 hours,
There was the reason for this, Angus. What happened in our active patrolling around Nui Dat was always 4,000 metres out. The reason it was 4,000 metres out was because mortar base plate positions can fire about 4,000 metres. So we had active patrolling all around the base up to at least 4,000 metres, so that anybody that came within that area would just be banging off a rocket launcher or something like that, or maybe one mortar round and then shooting through. They were not able to really do any real damage at the base until, of course, Long Tan. Long Tan was a little bit different. When we were mortared on the 17th of August, that landed right in the engineer area, but that was a prelude to an attack. Generally speaking, the base was left untouched.
When we were in base camp, we would be doing platoon or section size standing patrol. So we'd go out there and park for the night, set up an ambush. I hope it didn't get triggered. So as we were just saying here then, that covered the amount of ability for the Vietnamese to actually mortar us. Apart from the second night I was in Vietnam, which was the 17th of August, when I was on the receiving end of those incoming mortars. A couple of guys got wounded in the reinforcement wing where I was at the time, and that was the only time I have any recollection of incoming mortars or rockets, basically. Yeah.
David, can we talk a little bit more about what it was like to go on a patrol. So you've said, be it at section strength or platoon strength, 10 to 30 men, etc. Can you describe what it's like to camp out overnight, all covered up in your cam gear, having set your claymores, and really been unable to get much sleep and been eaten by mosquitoes?
Camping out on patrol initially was not much different to being in camp. When we first arrived in Vietnam, we were in hootsies. We weren't in tents. We didn't have any tents at all. And so the best we did, the only different thing was from our patrols. We had folding stretchers at Nui Dat, and we didn't have them when we were carting them out in the bush. So the tents came later, basically, and I think it was a good month or something like that before we started getting the big tents in and setting them up, and then that was quite a job because we had to go and scrounge, make floorboarding, duckboarding and that, which we used to steal from various places, and some goods that maybe arrived in somewhere and they were packed in packing cases, and we'd bust up the packing cases and use them to make floorboards or furniture or stuff like that, basically. Going out on patrol, well, most of the time we never used a tent when we were out on patrol. We just sleep on the ground. Too hard to get set up, and the risk of being seen. And so there was, a patrol sequence where we had a certain number of troops on guard duty, and the others had kept, and you'd just rotate the watch, basically. Yeah.
Could I ask what you did in the wet season then? Did you just lay if it rained at night? You just sat and just got soaked?
Yeah, you got wet. Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Let's keep going with that. When you got wet, David, and at night time, and you tried to get a bit of sleep, what did you do then? Lay down your wet clothes.
That's it. There was no choices. There were no choices. I can remember, particularly during the wet season, even when we were in Nui Dat, at the beginning we had no showers, and I can remember it was raining one afternoon. I thought there's an opportunity to get a shower, so you'd strip off completely and you'd stand outside the tent and it'd be bucketing with rain, and you'd get your soap and away you'd go, and you'd soap up and clean it, and then you'd get back into the tent and you'd put a chair just on the edge of the blackboard in the tent, and you'd stick your feet outside the tent and let your feet get washed, get the mud off your feet, and then you'd finish off that. That was the process,
One of the things that we did when we were wet, we put our raincoat on at night, because the raincoat on at night used to keep all the warmth in, and that was one way of keeping warm. So that's what I was wondering, whether you did that.
We didn't carry raincoats.
You didn't take a raincoat?
No. Yeah. We had enough crap to carry. I mean, I was carrying it. I was a radio operator early days, and that was 25 kilos and then a few batteries. So that was that, plus a couple of hundred rounds of ammunition, 4 days rations. There wasn't any room for extras.
So David, just on that, you'd go on patrol, and often these patrols could be how long?
Well, platoon-sized patrols generally weren't that long. Maybe 4 days, 5 days, something like that. Stretch it to a week. That'd be the maximum, basically. Mostly less than that. The company-sized patrols would be longer. That could be a week and a half,
Can you describe how an Australian platoon patrol could differ to an American patrol of the same size?
I was fortunate enough not to go on an American patrol. That's why I must be here talking about it. And what I know of American patrolling was rumours only, sort of thing. So I never, as I said, we had virtually no interaction with the Americans. I know that we did patrols along the main highway when the Big Red 1 division came in, and we had to guard them, but we were doing patrols along the road, and they were coming past in millions of trucks. So we were. I think that was a great decision by the Australian government to give us an area to look after and leave us alone, sort of thing. Was a policy that saved a lot of lives.
But Ron, in your case, it was very beneficial working with the Americans from an Air Force point of view.
Well, it was. I mean, their logistics system is vast, and of course we tapped into that. We didn't receive grata supplies from the Americans, but we took advantage of their system to buy material from them as necessary. We started off dropping Australian bombs, which we had a pretty large stockpile of in Australia, and we moved those up to Vietnam. And we started to run out of those, and we cleaned up all the 500-pounders, and we were then onto the 1,000-pound bombs, and they were running in pretty short supply. They were British designed bombs. And so we then had a look to see what the Americans had, and we found they had the Mark 117, a 750-pound bomb, which was a sleek, a fairly streamlined bomb. And the Americans weren't dropping a lot of those. They were mainly the F-100s used to drop 500-pound bombs, Mark 82s, as I remember, and we didn't bother with those. The Canberra could carry a pretty big bomb load, and all we could only carry 6-7 of these Mark 117s because the bomb bay couldn't hold any more than the length of 4 of them, which was unfortunate, although the aircraft could carry a great deal more weight. That was the most beneficial thing that we gained from the Americans.
Ron, where we've been talking with the infantry guys about being in the field, I mean, similarly, people would be wrong not to appreciate that a lot of your strafing runs were low level and you came into contact with the enemy all too often. Can you share some of those closer experiences?
We did a lot of bombing at low level in close support of troops. We broke up several potentially successful actions by the NVA by virtue of our bombing, by throwing bombs. We were very accurate. We got our average bombing error down to something less than 20 metres.
Wow.
Best in country. That was the best in country. No other American squadron could get near that. So we could drop bombs in close support near friendlies without killing the friendlies, you know. We were not supposed to bomb below, to release the weapon from below about 1,100 feet because the risk of being hit by our own bomb fragments increased quite exponentially quickly. But at times the cloud base, which prevented the other American aircraft from attacking because they were dive bombers, and they couldn't set up a dive bomb attack from somewhere around lower than 1,000 feet because the aircraft just didn't have time to get into the... We could slip in under the cloud base as level bombers. At times we went down to about 800 feet. We cheated, you know. I mean, if the guys on the ground needed the bombs, we weren't about to say, well, no, sorry, fellas, we might injure ourselves, so we're not going to do this, you know. We used to just get down lower.
And Ron, at that height, you could actually make out the figures on the ground.
Oh, yes, you could see what you were doing.
And were you receiving calls from Aussies, or was it mostly always American stuff?
In my time, we did very little support for the Australians down in the Duydad area and in the Phuc Tui province, because I guess the priority for targeting was further north and more particularly down the Delta. We did a lot of bombing in 4 Corps, or 4 military regions, it subsequently became called, on the canals, because we could line bomb along the canals and destroy long lines of bunkers more effectively than other aircraft could. I remember dropping bombs in Phuc Tui on the Long Highs, which was a range of basically granite boulders, I think they were, and the Viet Cong, as it probably was at the time, it may have been NVA because they were all over the place too. They had sort of rabbit warren-y type stores in the Long Highs supposedly, and we would throw our 750s at the Long Highs, and I think they just bounced off and gave them a bit of an earache because I don't think it was all that effective to be dropping high explosive on granite mounds. But you know, some of the other guys did a bit of support, but for the most part, I guess we were rather sorry that we weren't able to support the Australians more, but it just didn't happen. We were tasked ultimately up to about 11 missions a day, which meant several of us had to fly 2 missions. We were always tasked with a particular target, but en route we could be diverted to a target of higher priority. So if a forward air controller came across something untoward like troops in the open, he would call the support centres and they would, if necessary, change our target. So we en route, we had a 3-hour endurance, longer than any other aircraft could. So we could be diverted from a target down in the Delta in 4 Corps to a target up in I Corps, as we call it, up in the 1st Military Region, up near the North Vietnamese border. We could fly the length of the country and still drop our bombs up there. If then we ran a bit short of fuel, we duck into Da Nang and refuel and then head home. Yes, we had a lot of that diversion activity.
Let's talk about Long Tan, and Sandy, you touched on this before. I mean, it's the most notable Australian action of the war.
Not the most notable, it's the guys talked about. I reckon Coral Balmoral is the biggest battle.
Long Tan was first, and so it got...
Yeah.
Let's do Long Tan, then we'll go to Coral Balmoral. Okay. And let's talk about who was involved in that, because, you know, we do know people that were actually on the ground there. We know people who came in relief. What was your exposure there, Sandy?
I go back to May, June 66. My troop had the task of setting up the water point and the roads in Nui Dat. This is when 5 RAR were all around the whole of Nui Dat, but they were 3 kilometres from where we were working. When I went up there with half a troop, which is about 34 guys, we had to build roads, water points, had to find the water, all that sort of thing. But we also had to protect ourselves. And I would put that 6 weeks down to the most dangerous time that we ever had in Vietnam, because the closest Australian forces were 3 kilometres away. We lived and worked at night time as an independent infantry platoon, really. We put our own clearing patrols out. We had our own standing patrols out. Now, it was during the time, at night time, that we were being observed. And on 2 occasions, the Viet Cong came in, rattling wire, all that sort of stuff, wanting us to shoot, and we didn't shoot. But they actually turned the claymores around the other way, facing us. And thank goodness we didn't let them off either. That area was right on the edge of one field squadron area, and you'd remember that, David.
Yeah.
Now, when the 17th of August came, that particular area, plus I think it's the reinforcement holding unit, were right behind us.
They were.
Yeah.
Up on the rise.
Yeah, and then there was the boys that were used to be there before that were the SAS, but then they moved to SAS L. All that area was mortared. And of course, that is on the way through our position to Task Force headquarters. The original plan, right, was we went out when they were doing the reconnaissance back in June, was to come through that area to Task Force headquarters. That's what they reconnoitred. It never happened, but the mortars happened on the 17th. Now, the next day, of course, we've got, or that same day and night, I think it was B Company 6 RA were relieved by D Company 6 RA, and D Company 6 RA went out to find the base plate positions and all those sort of things. And that's when they basically disturbed a regimental attack. And it was that's when Long Tan developed. And those boys fought magnificently, no doubt about that. But they were saved by Air Force, artillery, and by the APCs that came in. They were able to inflict enormous casualties, hundreds, if not thousands, on the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese.
It's interesting you talk about casualties, because one of the American war aims was they didn't have aims, so they thought we'll just count dead. They were obsessed with just killing people and counting up the bodies. And at Long Tan, I know one of the guys in D Company, who we hope to speak to later, said that the number they counted up, he was one of the guys counting them. And his CO at the end said, that's enough, let's go. And they hadn't even finished counting them. And bodies were blowing up because of the artillery. And the body count recorded at Long Tan at first hand is conservatively undervalued. They reckon they got a lot more than they did.
Really
for what it's
interesting,
worth.
Angus. I take a trip back to Vietnam every year, and there's a girl who runs a tourist for the Vietnamese. When we were back at the Long Tan Cross, she said, you know, this cross is visited by thousands on Long Tan Day. I said, no, I didn't. She said thousands of Vietnamese. I said, how come it's visited by thousands of Vietnamese? And she said there were more than 1,000 killed that day. And when you look at the official figures, it's like hundreds.
Yeah, 450 or something.
240 or something on body by body count, basically, and at least double that anyway. So.
And David, what was your involvement?
Little. I arrived the day before and I was up there near the engineers and at the reinforcement wing, and we'd experienced the artillery firing the previous night, which to young blokes who'd never heard an artillery piece go off before, to put it politely, we were shitting ourselves, and jumped into the pits that were there, but it was just kind of false alarm basically for us. But the following night, the sergeant came running round and said we'd grown accustomed to this noise, and he said, we're being mortared, get in the pits. And we raced into the pits. Peter Erickson, who ended up in Delta Company 6 Row, had been through training right through with me, and we were sharing a tent together. He left his mug on the pillow, and when we came back to the tents after the mortar raid, his mug had a hole about the size of a 2-bob bit in it. He still got the mug. Fortunately, things fell in our way, and of course our artillery was, they saved the day basically. They fired something in the order of 3,000 rounds that night. We had about 3 or 4 guys wounded that night in the reinforcement wing. A company, which I ended up in, were out on patrol, looking for that mortar base. They did discover telephone cable wires. They found bandages, wounded, bandages. So they reckon our people had actually managed to get the mortar base. Well, A company came back into camp, and they went out virtually straight away. They'd had a feed made for them, and guys were stuffing. I think the cooks were making hamburgers that day, and Peter Bennett told me he was a machine gunner, and he said, I just stuffed a couple in my bloody pocket. We were back in the AP season on the way out there. The Air Force were told that it was outside their SOPs in relationship to flying in certain conditions. So it was heavy rain, and they were required to stay grounded, and it was only because the pilots involved on the Hueys virtually disobeyed orders and took a few of our blokes out with them, and we dropped ammunition from treetop height onto Delta Company, and
thank God you did.
And yeah, they saved the day.
A lot of these rules were dictated by the politicians. I mean, they were all mindful of the Australian population's reaction to the war. There was far too much limitation placed on the Australian forces in country to supposedly minimise losses so that it wouldn't look too bad for the media here. The rules of engagement as well were pretty pathetic in country. It was like fighting a war at times with one hand behind your back. That's why the tendency these days to keep the media away from the battlefront is to be commended, because you don't want any of that stuff to be getting out. You want to get stuck in, fight a war, no holds barred, and don't tell the people back home about it, because all they'll do is make it harder for you.
Which they did.
So, leaving Vietnam and all the conflict and war up north, let's talk about our return home and what experience was like as the war went on. So, Sandy, how was it for you, your reception at home?
I consider myself very lucky, Angus. It was early in the war, so I was back home in October 1966. My task when I was posted to the School of Military Engineering was I was actually talking about infantry engineer cooperation. So the stuff that I've spoken here about is something that I was new to all infantry. So I was out talking a lot to the infantry units that were about to go to Vietnam. I was lucky in that I was able to have some input into the way engineers were trained at the School of Military Engineering. My posting was the Captain Instructor Operations. The only major conflict that I really felt was when one RAR were having their march through Sydney. That's when all the newspapers were coming out with things like people calling them baby killers and stupid stuff and student stuff. It was like, I think the Premier of New South Wales was down at the Sydney University, and he had students laying on the road in front of them. Askin said, "Fry over the bastards," and of course they didn't, but I would say, here. They were being totally manipulated by the press, in my opinion. And we had a situation whereby the CO of 1RAR, who was Colonel Priest, and he was proudly leading his battalion home, which had served the time in 173rd Airborne Brigade as the 3rd Battalion of a unit there, very successful unit, 173rd Airborne Brigade. And some girl, can of paint, red paint, dripped it all over him and splashed him all about it.
And that was outside Town Hall steps, wasn't
that's
it?
Right,
Disgusting.
that's right. And you know, that affected Colonel Priest. He never thought there would be any way that any Australian could ever call him a leader of baby killers and this sort of thing. And it physically affected him enormously. And I've never, ever felt so sad as I have about that particular situation.
David, tell us about your homecoming.
Well, virtually as soon as I came home, I just basically had some leave, and then I was demobbed. The strange thing really was that by this stage, which was 1969, there was a lot of anti-Vietnam moratorium action had taken place. You know, like in Vietnam, we couldn't get our letters because the postmen had gone on strike. They wouldn't deliver letters to Vietnam, to such an extent that we had these signs all up around the place saying, punch a postie on RTA, return to Australia. So, there was a lot of, you could tell there was a lot of negative emotions in the community regarding Vietnam, to such an extent that when I came back, none of my family asked me about my experiences. I didn't get one question about what had happened in Vietnam. And that was the general sense that no one, wherever you went, where have I been in Vietnam? Oh, yeah. No one wanted to continue the conversation.
They didn't want to know.
They didn't want to know. There was such a build-up of this antipathy that it was such a bad war. The people who went there were bad. That when your own family don't even take an interest in it, you think, oh my gosh, And I remember, there were 3 of us dentists, and we basically lived together. We rented a unit together, and we lived together. And for a whole good 18 months, virtually, we need to stay together to have friends, to be friends with each other. It was very strange. I don't know whether we had built up some sort of psychological thing which separated us from them, but no one really wanted to be a friend. So we relied upon each other for friendship.
I think that's universal. I said, I came home from Vietnam, all my friends disappeared. Nobody said anything, but they just kind of didn't get invited. And I also, what you sort of mentioned, you didn't think that you were a problem, but I think we were the problem too, because we didn't think of the rest of the civilian population in the same light as we did our mates. Our mates were our family and our brothers, and we'd done things that these other people don't ever even understand to this day. So, we had nothing to talk to them about, basically. And I think there was this twofold thing. They didn't want to ask, and we didn't want to tell, basically.
And Ron, how about you?
I'd agree with that. We knew that most of the people back here wouldn't understand anyway, so there wasn't much point in talking about it.
Now, you're all up in Vietnam at different stages doing different roles. Vietnam is this chemical war as well. How you're all affected in certain ways. I mean, you're out in the field, David, they're spraying this bloody Agent Orange stuff and all these other things everywhere. It's on your base that you're handling it all the time. Even, back in your base, David and Sandy, certainly in the field, you guys are handling chemicals and you don't even know what you're handling. You don't know what's affecting you. How has the war physically affected you guys with regard to your health?
We weren't handling it, Angus. We were the result of it. Sometimes we had to travel through areas which had been defoliated. We could sometimes feel the spray. I was lucky once again in that I don't think that I or my children have been affected in any way, but my brother, who was in the Corps of Engineers as well, he lost one kidney through Agent Orange. And definitely I've had many guys who have died, who've had cancer, they died too young. they have been affected, no doubt about that. I've been extremely lucky.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I've got a disabled son. I can't categorically establish that it was the cause of that from getting sprayed, even though, you know, it was on all the time. The base was being sprayed, around the patrol areas was being sprayed everywhere. So, but, you know, I'm still fit as a Mallee bull, as they say. But, yeah. I know that some people are of the opinion that guys not only had got cancers and that, but the effect of their post-traumatic stress, their brains were damaged. I mean, I could tell you a little story about one guy goes into the coming home bit that you were just talking about before, and I think it's worthy of talking about him and his experience. Gary Mcmahon's his name, and I don't think he has any objections from me talking about it. Gary Mcmahon was in 9 section in my platoon, came home from Vietnam, the same as the rest of us. We came home on Sydney and we marched through Brisbane. We went to Niagara Barracks, we got paid out, given a travel warrant to go home and said, see you later, we've had enough of you, we don't need you anymore.
Thanks for your service.
Thanks for your service, right? So that was the last of our service. We did have that problem that, yeah, nobody wanted to talk to us, and as I said earlier, you know, most of my friends disappeared, and you just got into the habit, you didn't tell anybody you'd been to Vietnam. But I was a national serviceman, as is noted in the previous interview. Gary was a regular army, and he was 19 when he went over on the first trip. He went back 2 years later on a second tour, and he tells me he had a pretty reasonable tour because he spent most of his time training guys who just got off the boat. He was attached to reinforcement wing, but he travelled all over the countryside doing bits and pieces of patrols with these reinforcement guys who were given little tasks to do a patrol or give some security to some place or other. Gary came home and arranged to meet his father just up the street from here at the Roseville RSL Club. He turned up. He told me we had to get off the plane, and the authorities took him through the back exits through the back door rather than out through the main entrance, so nobody could see him. And he turned up at RSL in his uniform with his ribbons on, and he was told in no uncertain terms he wasn't welcome. And Gary, as Gary is, took offence to this and dropped this bloke, who's an ex-soldier, right? And
Fair enough.
They called the police and was escorted outside, and the coppers said to him, what's the problem? And he told the police what had happened. He said, listen, son, we'd like to go back in there and finish them all off for you. We're not allowed to, but we'll stay here and wait till your old man comes. His old man had served in the 9th Div in New Guinea and turned up and said, what's happened, Gary? And it was a very hard day for his old man, you know, that his son was being treated that way. Gary ended up, you might call him a basket case. Anybody who served in the infantry or in field engineers has got some post-traumatic stress. There's nobody that doesn't. And Gary's particularly bad. He'd split up from his wife. They couldn't live together. They're still good mates and they're still married. She lives in Brisbane and Gary lives at the RSL home in Narrabeen. Gary was on a mission of self-destruction. He just sat there in his little unit there and did nothing all day except for look at the computer and on Facebook and look at stuff that was on Vietnam War. He wrote a great big documentary about it. He didn't eat right, didn't do any exercise, didn't look after himself medically. And I'd been down there recently trying to look after him. Turns out there's another Knox boy, Rod Kane, who I'm not sure if he was.
I don't remember him, no.
He was in our year or maybe a year before or after, but he was obviously around our hand because he was in Vietnam at the same time. He was in B Company and he was down at the Narrabeen place, Narrabeen RSL home, and I'm the New South Wales representative for 6RAR, and I get the message that there's a guy passed away up there. Turns out he's been living 2 doors away from Gary, and Gary doesn't know him, and they don't even know what unit he's been serving in. The guy's virtually drunk himself to death. They had a service in the chapel at the RSL home. Like Gary's, the family had split up, and the wife was up in Port Macquarie. She came down with the kids, who were adults. There were 2 or 3 guys there who lived in the centre of Vietnam veterans. One other guy from his company who lives in the area came, and his commanding officer. That was all that was there. This bloke had just killed himself. Well, Gary was doing the same thing, and I went down there, often. And one day I turned up there. He'd been complaining about sore feet. He'd sold his car because I can't drive anymore because my feet are so sore. And I said, "What have you done to the doc? Been to the doctors?" "Yeah, the doctor's treating him for everything but what he should be." And one day I turned up there with Alex, my son, and I looked down at his feet, and he's got 2 black toes. I said, "Soldier, pack your kit bag. We're going to hospital now, right now." And I took him to hospital. I thought he'd save his leg, but 2 or 3 weeks later, it just got worse again. And I'm going backwards and forwards to Marnevale Hospital. I'll be there today. Gary lost his leg about 3 weeks ago. This is all
casualty of this war. It just keeps giving.
Yeah.
And it's not on the headlines, but it's what you all live through. But I've heard the RSL thing, which I agree is disgraceful.
Well, my eldest son's disabled. I spent some time with the Army Servo Regiment after I came back, and came across and became good friends with one of the majors there who, on his return from Vietnam, had twins, and they were both disabled. The next child was okay. At Phan Rang, we were sprayed with Agent Orange around the base to keep the place defoliated, and the squadron that did this was on the base. The 123s were there, and they also used to spray the base once a week with DDT, and this was to keep the mosquitoes down, supposedly to stop malaria, seen as the bigger risk. And of course these guys used to spray at dawn, break of dawn, and that was a period of low activity for their normal operations, which had to be in daylight. So they'd take advantage of that, and they would delight in coming over the top of our hooches at something like 10 feet. They were just scraping over the tops of the hooches with their spray bars, churning out this DDT. It was so dense that it used to come through. We had these wall-mounted air conditioners to blow through the air conditioners, and it would create a fog in the room. As soon as you heard the noise of the aircraft go overhead, the whole building would go, and of course the din was, you'd grab for a blanket or something and put it over your mouth to try and reduce the smell of this stuff. So having had this on a regular basis, I believe that my prostate cancer, which there was a great incidence of prostate cancer amongst all of us in 2 Squadron ex-Vietnam. One of my mates died from prostate cancer, a guy I used to do a lot of flying with. And I believe that was a big contributor to cancers and that sort of thing. And I don't think they talk a lot about Agent Orange, but they don't talk about DDT, which is a known carcinogen. But in those days, it was just something people used to put in those little spray things to spray to kill mosquitoes. But it was obviously very bloody dangerous.
Yeah, well, similarly, I mean, I just remember those. We used to call them. They had the fogging machines. They used to put them on the back of the Land Rovers, and once a week, the fogging machines would just come out and be spraying, going up and down the roads and the camps and the tents, and you'd be coughing. You'd be coughing quite a bit, while it had been going on. And I remember that quite clearly. I mean, I don't know. Personally, I have a pretty good health. My eldest daughter, my first daughter born to our family, has Down syndrome, and apparently the incidence of Down syndrome in Vietnam veterans is much higher than the incidence in the general population. So you don't know, but it's when your first one has Down syndrome, you sort of wonder what's going on.
I have a child who's intellectually disabled, and you come into this world and you think you're just going to live a normal life, and then something happens to you and you accept it, and then you start to notice people who are similarly affected to you. And what I noticed with you all, Sandy, with the exception of yourself, is that you all had kids that were disabled. And you were all Vietnam veterans, and you were all affected by these chemicals. And this is just a common thing I keep hearing. And look, thank you for bringing that out. I hadn't sought to directly ask that question, but you all very kindly volunteered it. But this is the point on Vietnam, that your nation calls you, in many cases tells you you have to go, and you're conscripted and off you go. You do the very best job that you can do, and in fact, in all the fields, in the tunnels, in the Air Force, in the medical care, in our patrolling, we are the best up there. And you guys are the best up there. And you do this magnificent job, and then the politicians that send us there then turn on us. All of society turns on us. You come home, we don't want you wearing your uniform, we want you to sort of sneak back into society on the back door. There won't be a coming home parade anymore, because that's just not going to work. And then the side effects of the war chase you, and it affects your children. And this has been the most defining event in your life, because it has dominated your life. It's dominated your youth, and it's affected the rest of your life. And I just can't help but be moved and notice this situation that you all have in common, and how you've all so nobly served. You just get back on with your lives, and you all are carrying your own crosses. And it's been lovely to just talk. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about how Vietnam affected you? And perhaps, David, we might start with you.
Look, I don't think otherwise. Vietnam has affected me too much. I made up my mind. I remember a delegation came to me of a few people from North Shore saying that they would take me to have 3 days at North Shore Hospital to detect anything that Vietnam might have affected me at all. And so, would you like to do that? So you could probably get some remuneration or whatever. I sort of, at the time, and I suppose ever since, I have had times of anxiety and anxiousness. And at that time particularly, I was finding interpersonal relationships difficult. But I sort of made up my mind that I didn't want to feel like I've suffered from Vietnam. I didn't want to take that mindset. So I sort of said, no, I don't want these tests. I will make my way. I mean, I don't know, but that was my mindset. And so I just tried to sort of, leave it all behind me and get on with my life, basically. And otherwise, look, I'm very fortunate. I have a very healthy life.
Ron, how about you?
Well, I have peripheral neuropathy now, which is increasingly making walking difficult, and they can't find a cause of that. It's got nothing to do with diabetes or anything of that nature. So, that's one little problem. And there's no doubt that we that have served in the Defence Forces, due to the discipline, are probably more difficult to get along with than most other people in civilian life. And it puts a lot more stress on marriages and that sort of thing, just by virtue of the fact that this is the way we function. In the Air Force, there was this, operating an aeroplane efficiently requires extreme discipline, and if you're not well disciplined, you don't do the job. So that runs through all sorts of other defence activity too. So I don't suppose one could say that we haven't been affected by it. I certainly know I have. I'm not the easiest fellow to get along with a lot of the time, so I put that down to my defence background. And Vietnam was just the extreme case of it, where we were all obliged to be doing something that probably wasn't the nicest thing to do under conditions of high discipline.
Vietnam's every day, if only for a few seconds. I do a lot of things in my life. I try to do a lot of things in my life, and I run on Friday night. I kayak. I'm looking after veterans. One thing, and I try to be as occupied as I can, because I find that's probably the best bloody cure of thing. The more you sit down and sit around, you end up thinking about things you shouldn't be thinking about. When you're young and you're working and you're in a business like I was, and you're just preoccupied with that all the time, you don't get too much chance or opportunity to think about things. But I found later in life it's changed. Your comment about not being the easiest person to live with. Go and talk to my wife, and I think that any Vietnam veteran who's married still is lucky, because he's got a special woman that's looking after him. Because I think it takes a special woman to be a wife of a veteran. I'm in your shoes, basically. I'm not always the most easiest person to get on with, you know.
I divorced, but I'm now back again living with my ex-wife. We haven't remarried, but I mean, it's still not the easiest existence, I can assure you. But
that's a win, that's a big win.
Yeah, good.
But you know, and yeah, I'm very emotional. You know, when I hear of blokes getting hurt, and even, you know, when the casualties were occurring in Afghanistan, and I'd listen to the news, it'd bring me to tears, even though I didn't know the guys.
Sandy, we started these podcasts with you, and you had a very special war in those tunnels. What's your closing thought on Vietnam for us today?
David said that he thinks, and I think others agreed, that there's always a little bit of PTSD around with most people who went to most wars, I think.
All wars,
yeah. And we didn't call it PTSD in the First World War, but what the hell was it? Anyway, I do think that that PTSD within each one of us has been affected more by the fact that we were not welcomed home, that our own peers shunned us. I think that the press has a lot to answer for, there's no doubt about that. But I also think that PTSD has gradually got a bit worse with that sort of treatment. And I do believe, though, that society has moved forward from that. I think the Welcome Home parade in 1987 was something that we really needed. Now, it was 20 odd years later, but it happened. Most RSLs today are run by ex-Vietnam guys. There's no doubt that guys from Afghanistan are being welcomed with open arms if they go there. And I think this is all something that we have learned as a society, and we need to learn it too. I, for one, am very glad of the experiences that I had in Vietnam. Not all of them were good, but they were experiences nevertheless that have moulded me. I am very sad about situations that I have seen amongst the veteran community, and particularly amongst my own troop of 68 soldiers who there's some very, very sad stories of PTSD amongst them. I do think, though, as a society, we're learning. I don't think that'll happen again.
Gentlemen, it's been a great opportunity to talk with you all this morning. Thank you for coming and sharing your wonderful stories. I said it to you individually, and I'll say it as a group. We are so proud of all of you for your service, and we thank you. Thank you for coming today.
That was Angus Hordern's panel talk with Sandy MacGregor, David Buckwalter, David Leafe and Ron Aitken. All were interviewed in Season 1 of Life on the Line by Angus and me. Look up their individual stories. There are 1st, 5th, 9th and 12th veteran conversations. David Buckwalter also spoke with us in Season 2 about a historical subject he is very passionate about. That bonus episode is called The Battle of Wow with David Buckwalter. We have one more instalment in our panel series coming up. Tune in next week for my conversation with 3 veterans of the Air Force, Navy and SAS. We spoke about PTSD, transitioning from the military into civilian life, and the difficulties that entails. Let us know what you think of the episode by emailing podcast@lifeonthelinepodcast.com. Our website is www.lifeonthelinepodcast.com, where you can find out more information about us and all our past episodes. Also follow us on social media, Life on the Line Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and LOTL Pod on Twitter.
Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions.
Artwork by Mark Thacker at Big Cat Design.
Music by Dan Van Werkhoven of Mark IV Multimedia.
thank you for listening, and lest we forget.